Oh, okay, yes, thank you. I understand.
When I'm done, okay.
Right.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm this year's president, and I'm gonna give some quick announcements. Beginning next month, May, our lectures will be starting at 7 p.m. We will be publicizing this change as well as emailing all members. It will be on our website, in our weekly newsletter, on Facebook, and an email from me. So that's 7 p.m. starting next month, May, for our lectures. And then I hope some of you joined us for our wonderful Observing Basics session, session 1, taught by our Vice President, Bill Kircher. The second session is coming up, and it is entitled Choosing the Right Telescope or Binoculars to Suit Your Interests, Circumstances, and Budget. That class will be on Thursday, May 6th at 7 p.m. And it is free and available for all members and non-members. And it is taught over Zoom, and it is also live streamed just like our lectures on Facebook and YouTube. And then we have another announcement. A longtime member and former president of the SFA, Bill Charrington, has retired from active night sky viewing and is out of the area. He owned a magnificent collection of equipment, including some large Dobsonians, a wide selection of specialty and high-end lenses, and other equipment. Ray Cash is assisting in selling these items, which are located in Colma. Ray posted about this in the SFAA Facebook group. If you're not a part of that and didn't see it, I'll be posting a link to photos and a list of all the items in the chat window on this Zoom meeting. And then you can email Ray, which I'll also be posting his email address, and let him know what you're interested in. As Bill would have wanted, the equipment is being offered to SFAA members at a discount, and the items are going fast, and they are also listed on a couple other sites such as Astromart. If you have any questions about any of that, please, you can email me or just message me in the chat window on here. And that is it for our announcements for today. And I will turn this over to Linda. You have to unmute yourself.
Got it. All right. On Wednesday, May 19th, as we was stated, we'll begin an hour earlier on Zoom. And so we'll meet here on Zoom at 6:30. The lecture will begin at 7, but a few minutes before that, I'll be introducing the speakers as I always do. The topic is variable stars and their stories. And I'm so pleased to have Dr. Stella Kafka, who's the executive director of the American Association of Variable Star Observers, AAVSO. AAVSO was founded in 1911, and variable stars have always been one of the most intriguing targets for observers and provide unique insights into critical stages of stellar evolution. Dr. Kafka will introduce aspects of stellar variability, their significance in astrophysics. And finally, you'll learn how you and your family can participate in variable star observations from your backyard and to contribute to the AAVSO database. Then on Wednesday, June 16th, again, meeting on Zoom at 6:30 with a lecture starting at 7, globular clusters and the role of binary star dynamics. Dr. Adrienne Kuhl, professor, physics and astronomy, SF State University. Dr. Kuhl will share results from her research on globular clusters, which are ancient and fascinating objects. And she and her students search for binary stars in globular clusters using space-based observatories. She will also discuss her founding of the Organization of Astronomy and Astronomy Educators, named Astronomers for Planet Earth. Our speaker tonight, Dr. Christopher McKay, is a senior planetary scientist, Space Science Division, NASA Ames Research Center. He received his PhD in astrogeophysics from the University of Colorado in 1982. He majored in physics at Florida Atlantic University and also studying mechanical engineering, and he graduated in 1975. He's been a research scientist with NASA Ames since earning his PhD. His research focuses on life in extreme environments and the search for life on other worlds in our solar system. He's also actively involved in planning for future Mars missions, including human exploration. Chris has been involved in research in Mars-like environments on Earth, traveling to ice-covered lakes in Antarctica, permafrost in the Siberian and Canadian Arctic, many deserts, including the Atacama, the Namib, and the Sahara deserts, to study life in these extreme environments. He was a co-investigator on the Huygens probe to Saturn's moon Titan in 2005, the Mars Phoenix lander mission in 2008, the Mars Science Laboratory mission in 2012, and also the Dragonfly mission to Titan, set to arrive in 2034. Now, our speaker studied physics in college, but was not particularly interested in space until he discovered an old telescope in a lab closet, which later inspired him to build his own. Tonight, we will learn about the Dragonfly mission to Titan and the search for life, and we welcome Dr. Chris McKay. Thank you so very much.
Great. Thank you, Linda, and hello, everybody. Good to talk to you again. I think last time, many years ago, maybe almost 10 years ago, we were at the Presidio. Less of a drive, but a better venue, I think, in terms of the scenery. So as Linda said, I'm at NASA Ames, just down 101. Traffic's a lot lighter these days. And unfortunately, it's closed. NASA is. And I'm in the Space Science Division, and my interest is in missions to other worlds that search for life. And I've been involved in this for some time, and what I want to talk to you about tonight is the Saturn system. And two missions that we're thinking about or are planned for the Saturn system. One is in the concept phase, the other is an approved mission. So I'll focus on that, and that's the Dragonfly mission. So let me see if I can share my screen. And let's see here, where is where's PowerPoint? Okay, it's always an adventure finding out how to do this. Advanced files. Okay, well, I'm going to try it this way. Do you see slides?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I'm going to try to be a little more clever here and tell, okay, let me just work with this. Do you still see them? Do you see a title slide? Great. Okay, thank you. So the title is Searching for Life in the Saturn System. And there's two worlds in the Saturn system that I'm going to talk about. Enceladus, and I'm going to call it the most familiar. You'll see why. And Titan, I'm going to call it the most strange. And okay, you know who you are, San Francisco amateur astronomers, and you know the date. And then that's me down there at the bottom. Okay, here's the Saturn system. You're all familiar with it. Beautiful. Many astronomers or amateur astronomers were convinced that this was something of interest by looking at Saturn. I know I was. As Linda found out somehow, I don't know. I found a telescope and it was a 10-inch Newtonian in the closet, and I took it out, and Saturn was one of the things I looked at, and wow, it amazed me, and I've been interested ever since. But now, of course, we're looking at spacecraft missions to the moons. Enceladus, little tiny moon in the middle of the E-ring. It's always been suspect because the E-ring shouldn't be there. You can't see the E-ring very easily from Earth. You see the big rings, the bright rings, but you can see it with a big scope. And it shouldn't be there. It's dynamically unstable. So that led to suggestions that Enceladus was the source for it, indeed. And Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, is off the image here. It's so far away. But Enceladus and Titan proved to be the most interesting worlds in the Saturn system for the search for life. Enceladus really hit the front page in 2005 when Cassini detected a plume coming out of the south pole of Enceladus, a jet of water. On the left is the actual image from the Cassini camera looking toward the sun. So it's a what's called very high phase angle. And then the other picture is the contours of the intensity of that light. So there's water coming out. And we know Cassini flew through that plume many times during its mission and sampled it, measured spectrum, measured the organics, measured the salts. So we know a lot about where that plume is coming from and what's going on in the ocean. We know that the ocean covers the entire world. It's a small world, after all, 500 kilometers. It's much smaller than the other moons, Europa, Earth's moon, for example. It has a thick ice shell, 10 to 20 kilometers thick, and then a deep ocean, 65 kilometers, and then a very rocky core. And we know that there's hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean because we see the chemical signatures of these vents in the plume. And the most amazing thing we see in the plume is organics. This is the analysis of the plumes from a paper in 2009, moving through the plumes with a simple, very simple mass spectrometer, measuring organics. And there you see a host of organics, complex organics, up to the limit of the spectrometer. The plume contains carbon, it contains hydrogen, nitrogen, it contains, of course, water. It's not just water, it's a soup. Many microorganisms on Earth would live happily in that soup. And of course, the best thing about it is there's samples, free samples. Just go right through and grab them. It's really almost too good to be true. Here is water containing organics, nutrients, and everything needed for life coming out of an ocean that's very much like Earth's ocean in terms of salinity. And the samples are just coming into space. All we got to do is fly through and get them. So that's what we want to do. So we are putting together a concept of a mission called ELSA, apparently a Disney character, but also the name of our mission, to fly through the plume and collect some samples. And this is a PowerPoint artist's conception of our spacecraft flying through the plume. And what are we going to look for? We're going to look for the same kind of molecules we find in life on Earth. That's what I mean by the most familiar. This ocean that we're going through is very much like our ocean. Organisms that live in our ocean would live happily in this ocean. And the converse is true. If there was organisms living in this plume and we brought them to Earth, they'd be happy to swim away in our ocean, which is a source of concern, by the way. So we're looking for things like amino acids, which are used in proteins on Earth. Now, as you all remember, life on Earth only uses L amino acids and not D amino acids in the construction of proteins. It uses D amino acids in other uses, but predominantly it uses L amino acids because that's all it uses in proteins. So if you had a chunk of carbon-containing material, and you were told it was either the remains of an organism on Earth or a meteorite, both of those materials would have amino acids. But in the remains of the organisms on Earth, you would find 20 amino acids ranging in complexity from as simple as glycine to as complicated as tryptophan. And you would find that in the proteins of that organic material, in the long chains of amino acids, it was all L. So there's a signature of life on Earth in the amino acids. We would look for that signature in the plume of Enceladus. And we would hope that it would have all the same chirality, as it's called. But in fact, my hope would be it would be D. So it would be opposite of Earth life, like mirror life. Anyway, the approach that illustrates is that what we're looking for is the same kind of molecules that life on Earth uses. The amino acids, their distribution, their chirality, the lipids that life on Earth uses. So we're looking for the fingerprint of life just like Earth, but hopefully the fingerprint will be slightly different, right? It'll be different enough to be interesting, but similar enough that it would confirm our view that life in water is going to look like amino acids and lipids folded together, which is what life on Earth looks like at this level. And so when we're going through the plume of Enceladus, we are very much basing what we look for on our understanding, our detailed understanding of life on Earth. Okay, now let's go to Titan. Remember the title, Enceladus, the most familiar, Titan, the most strange. Titan, we are going to Titan. There's an approved mission that's being built right now. It will launch in 2027. It'll land on Titan in 2034. I don't know why I have 2035 here. That's a typo. It will land on Titan in 2034. And it's called Dragonfly. The principal investigator is Zibby Turtle, she's at Johns Hopkins University. I've actually never asked Zibby why they called it Dragonfly. But there must be some interesting story there. I'm a McKay on this mission, and it was already named when I was asked to join. And then I just said yes. Anything going to Titan, my answer is yes. I'll be happy to be involved. Keep in mind that Titan, unlike Enceladus, is very much an Earth-like world. I say here it's an Earth-like planet. That's a mistake. There's now a specific definition for planet, which in my mind makes no sense at all, but that's a whole separate discussion. Titan is an Earth-like world, and it has a thick atmosphere. And when I think of the Earth-like worlds in our solar system, it's Venus, Earth, Mars, Titan. And so it's very interesting. It's about the size of Earth's moon. And so it's only got 1/7 of Earth's gravity, but it has a thick atmosphere, 1.5 atmosphere pressure. It's the only world in the solar system where the pressure at the surface is within a factor of 10 of the pressure at Earth's surface. Sea level on pressure on Titan is only 1.5 times sea level pressure on Earth. So here, just as a quick sketch of what the Dragonfly mission is, I'll come back to this. It will launch in June 2027 on one of the new high energy boosters that both commercial and NASA possibilities there. It'll only take 6.7 years to get to Saturn because we're launching on a heavy booster, on a high energy booster. We don't have to fly by Venus, and we only have to fly by Earth once. We arrive 24th of February, 2034. So mark your calendars. If you want me to send you a calendar invitation, let me know. Be there. It's only 13 years from now, right? 13 years from now. And it will enter on an aeroshell parachute, looks familiar. Titan is the easiest planet in the solar system to land on, the easiest world in the solar system to land on. Easier than the moon, easier than Mars, easier than Earth. And the reason is it has a really thick atmosphere, 1.5 times Earth, and really low gravity. So you come in like a flutter. It just doesn't take much at all to slow down. It's so easy to enter Titan's atmosphere that we're going to deploy the Dragonfly spacecraft from the descent. It's a drone. It flies. It's never going to land before it starts flying. It's just going to pop out, and I'll show you this in a video later. Okay, this is just to keep you interested in the mission. Titan, from a biology point of view, Titan is interesting because it has beaches. This is Titan on the beach. Now, because you're astronomers, I'll tell you the backstory on this picture. This is not Titan, obviously. This is Nevada, and this is Lake Mead behind the dam. And this is me standing there, and a BBC crew is filming me. And then they took that and red toned it, obviously. And they sent me this still and said, hey, what do you think? And I wrote them back and I said, well, it looks great, except you've got the rings tilted. The Titan is going to be in the orbital plane of the rings. The orbit of Titan is in the plane of the rings. So the rings are going to look edge on. So you don't really have it right. But I said, I wouldn't change it because it looks so nice. And if you put the rings edge on, it's not going to look any nice. And don't worry about realism. You've got a person standing on Titan. You're not doing a realism here. Go ahead and leave them tilted. I never got a response from them, but years later, I happened to be seeing a bit of the show, and I saw this scene, and they had straightened the rings out. They were flat. Anyway, Titan has beaches. That was the point of this scene, which means it has liquids. The liquids lap up on the shore, and you're underneath the sun and the planets. It's the mix of air, atmosphere, liquid, and surface. And life likes beaches. And I don't mean us sitting there with a lemonade underneath an umbrella. You wouldn't be doing that on Titan. The liquid in this beach is liquid methane and liquid ethane at a temperature of 95 Kelvin, which is minus 180 centigrade and minus a lot Fahrenheit too. I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit. So it's very cold, but it's got beaches. Here's the distribution of the Great Lakes on Titan. This is the South Polar region. This is one of the major discoveries of Cassini, these vast network of large lakes. These are hundreds of kilometers across. They're not as big as Earth's ocean, but that's a lot of liquid there. And on the surface of Titan, where the probe landed near the equator, the ground was wet. It was desert-like surface, but it was wet. So could there be life on Titan? So before I answer that question, and you can probably guess my answer, I want to talk about life on Earth. After all, everything we know about life, we learned on Earth. So what do we know on Earth? On Earth, life is carbon-based, and it lives in liquid water. Because carbon is widespread and liquid water is widespread on Earth, life is widespread. It's everywhere. Because it's widespread, it has global effects on the atmosphere. The oxygen, the methane, and the CO2, among others, are all the direct result of life on Earth. Life makes the oxygen, makes the methane, makes the CO2, consumes the oxygen, consumes the methane, and consumes the CO2. So if you flew a drone to Earth and flew around, you'd be able to tell there was life on Earth without doing any biochemistry at all, just by monitoring and measuring these gases in the atmosphere. And the one that would be the most interesting of these three would be CO2. Because if you were measuring CO2 from space, far away, say from Alpha Centauri, looking at the Earth, you'd say, yeah, there's CO2 in that planet. It's about 400 parts per million, and it's rising slowly. It was 300 parts per million when I did my thesis. Now it's 400 parts per million. But you'd say it's sort of averaging 400 parts. But if you were on a drone near the surface and you were flying on this scene of this lake and this forest, you flew into the forest, and if it was daytime, CO2 would be dropping. If it's nighttime, CO2 would be rising. If there was a cabin on this forest with people in it, and you flew in through the window, CO2 would shoot up because the people are breathing out CO2. CO2 varies a lot in our environment because of the action of plants and animals consuming and producing CO2 on seasonal, daily, and hourly timescales. You'd be surprised at how much CO2 is in your room right now as you're listening to Zoom compared to outside your window, right? So you could really see, and all of that variation in CO2, all of it that you would measure on your little drone is due to life forms, plants and animals and humans breathing in and breathing out CO2. Okay, so there's a lesson here on how to detect life on Earth without knowing anything about biochemistry. Of course, if we were going to detect life on Earth now, if you were a biologist studying that lake, you would detect life using DNA and amino acids and lipids. And that's what we're going to do on Enceladus, because we think we know what the answer is. But on Titan, very different. On Titan, if there's life, it would be carbon-based. There's lots of carbon on Titan, but it would be living in liquid methane and ethane. Could there be life in liquid methane and ethane? Well, we don't know. We only know life in liquid water. Well, if there was life in liquid methane, it would be widespread because the liquid methane is widespread. So it would have a global effect. What would those global effect be? Well, the global effect would be, we think, consuming hydrogen. That there would be variations in hydrogen on a moment by moment basis due to biology consuming it. And here's why we think that. The one thing we can say about life everywhere in the universe is it requires energy. That's a very robust conclusion from the laws of thermodynamics. It requires energy. What are the likely energetic reactions on Titan? On Earth, for example, us humans get our energy by reacting organic material, preferably in the form of chocolate, with oxygen, and that gives us energy. We consume organic material with oxygen. On Titan, there is no oxygen, but organisms can get energy by consuming organic material and reacting it with hydrogen. So if there's life on Titan, we predict it will breathe hydrogen. And so this is just a technical plot for those of you that are interested in it on the reaction, energy being released by these kind of reactions. And I compare it to the energy that methanogens release when they do methane production on Earth. So it's enough to support life on Earth, and life on Earth is probably more costly than living on Titan, which is very cold. So life probably goes there in a slow rate. The point is that this argument that life on Titan will consume hydrogen is completely independent of knowing what the life is made out of. We're not looking for amino acids. We're not looking for lipids. Amino acids and lipids work great in water, Earth, and Enceladus, but they won't work at all in liquid methane or ethane. Liquid methane and ethane are non-polar solvents, very low temperature. The chemistry of life, if it's there, will not be like the chemistry of life in water, which is a highly reactive, high dielectric polar molecule that controls the molecules that are in it. Amino acids, lipids, and DNA and RNA all conform to the imposition set on them by water. They're all at the mercy of water. Okay, so schematically, here's what we're predicting. If there was life on Titan, it would consume hydrogen. If there's no life on Titan, we know of no other process at the surface of Titan that would consume the very stable molecule hydrogen, H2. So no life, it should be uniform. Kind of like argon on Earth's atmosphere. If you measured argon in Earth's atmosphere, there'd be no variation. It's inert. No life forms consume it, no life forms produce it. But if there was life, it might be consuming the hydrogen. That's our prediction. So it's very cool. So now, we studied this many years ago. This paper you can see is 2005. If someone had asked me, when will that ever get tested? Well, boy, I don't know if I'd live long enough to see it ever get tested. But what do you know? Now, Dragonfly, 8-blade drone, is going to fly to Titan. And one of the things it will do, and I take part of the blame for that, is it will search for hydrogen variation. Right? It will also have a mass spectrometer that might detect the sort of chemical patterns that life leaves, like the L and the D amino acids as well. But we don't know in advance what they are. On Enceladus, we know to look for amino acids and lipids. We're looking in a habitat that's got water. We know what the best way to live in water is, we think. We have no clue on what the best way to live in liquid methane, liquid ethane is. But we know if there is life there, it's probably going to pick certain molecules and not others. So the mass spec might be useful. So we have two ways that we are searching for evidence of life in very general ways. The first generality is life uses energy, and hydrogen is that energy source. The second is that life uses only some molecules, we don't know which, and the mass spec might allow us to detect that. So here's our spacecraft. It's a pretty big drone. You may have seen the flight of the little tiny drone on Mars. Well, they could only fly a little tiny drone on Mars because Mars is one of the worst planets for flying because it's got an atmosphere that's 100 times thinner than Earth's atmosphere. And the gravity is still 1/3. on Titan, the atmosphere is 1.5 times thicker. It's denser because it's colder, and the gravity is 7 times less. So if you had wings, you could probably flap strong enough to fly yourself on Titan if you didn't mind the cold weather. So it's run by an MMRTG. It's nuclear powered. It lands on the ground, charges up batteries, and then uses that battery to power the rotors. And then it flies a little ways, sets down, charges up the rotors again. The MMRTGs are at constant low-level energy, trickle charge the batteries. It talks directly to Earth, and that's easy because Titan is synchronously locked to Saturn. And so a day on Titan, in terms of watching the sun, the sidereal day is 16 Earth days. And Earth, of course, viewed from Saturn, is right in the line of the sun, very close. So Earthrise and Earthset, Earthrise to Earthrise is 16 days. So we have 16 days of Earth in view in the sky, and then 16 days of Earth not in view. So the spacecraft flies for 16 days, talking to Earth, and then it rests for 16 days. And we do that over and over again until it dies for some reason. Okay. So here is a video of it landing. It's really quite remarkable. Let's roll it. So it's coming in on the parachute, kind of easy entry, not even a sonic boom. It drops out of the parachute and turns on its rotors and flies. It doesn't wait to land before it unwraps and starts moving. It's flying right out of the box. And it's on its own. It's not talking to anybody. It finds a landing spot. It's a helicopter after all. It's not hard to land. Goes down, lands, pops up its antenna and says, "Hello, Earth, we're here." And then it takes measurements, spends several days, probably a week at the site. Then it flies to another site and does it somewhere else. And so we can explore much more ground than the rovers on Mars can, because we're flying. We're flying and we're making good airspeed, and we can land down anywhere. We can set down in places you could never drive to. We hope to go to dunes and lake beds and all sorts of places. It's going to be an incredible mission. And all this will start in 13 years. It's exciting. I'm thrilled to be on this mission. And if I could, whisper a word to myself in 2005 when we wrote that paper and said, "Hey, yeah, it's going to happen," I'd be amazed. Okay, and this is my last slide. I wanted to, having talked to you guys before, I know you're a smart group, and normally we have questions in the middle of the talk. So a 20-minute talk turns into an hour talk, which is great. But on Zoom, it's so hard to do. We just have to bundle the questions at the end. So hopefully there's plenty of time for questions, and this slide is intentionally left blank. So I will stop sharing at this point, and we're back on. So Linda, do you want to, how do we know if someone's asking a question, and how do we proceed? Do you have a procedure that you've established with your group?
I'll see what we can do to make it easy for you, Chris. If people want to type their questions in, I'll be happy to catch them and read them so you don't miss them. Or certainly people could turn their microphones on and just ask the questions directly.
Yeah, isn't there a way to, oh yeah, there's a hand. I think you can raise your hand or something.
That's another option, sure.
Yeah, okay. Tom Kellogg has his hand up.
Dr. McKay, thank you so much, and congratulations on getting on this exciting project. I really enjoyed your presentation. And so the Enceladus mission, to be able to go through the plume of that liquid water coming out of Enceladus is just fascinating.
Yeah.
And it makes me think, if there are single cell organisms in that water, would there be any instruments that where you could actually, with a microscope, see that there are already one-celled animals or multi-celled animals or plants?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it comes up a lot. And what we expect, based on looking at hydrothermal vents on Earth, that the type of organism that's likely to survive in Enceladus is a methanogen. They're actually archaea, type of microorganism called archaea. They consume hydrogen and CO2 to form methane, and that's how they make their living. They're found in deep sea vents on Earth. They're also found in cows and termites, and even, I think it's something like 10% of humans have methanogens in their guts and produce methane. So that's what we'd expect. If they are microorganisms, we could, in principle, catch enough material to see one. Well, that's very hard to do, to get them. And if you look at them, they're not going to be doing anything. They've been sprayed out in space in droplets that have frozen. And even when methanogens are in culture, they're not swimming, they're not moving. They're not like, they're not going to give you a strong visual indication that they're alive. Now, if you had very, very high resolution, you could see ultrastructure within the cell and pick out the components, the whatnot. Bacteria are pretty simple. They don't have the wonderful complexity of eukaryotic cells, which are much bigger. So it's very hard. So we are not, at least in our mission, we are not proposing to use a microscope. Now, other teams are. Other folks have. I was on the review panel of a proposal to the Moore Foundation to develop a microscope, a holographic microscope. And one of the points was Enceladus. And I said, yeah, it would be wonderful to have such microscope image. But we're not doing that. In our mission, we're taking the idea that if there's organisms, they're going to produce a lot of organic material. It's going to leak all over the place. So there'll be way more extracellular evidence of life than cellular evidence of life. And this is what we see in aquatic environments on Earth. There's way more, especially in extreme environments. So we're looking for the amino acids and the lipids. So we're looking for the live bodies and the dead bodies and the leftover pieces of bodies. All of that we would be able to detect and see. So that's the approach that we're taking. And it's easier to make the instruments to do that than it is to make the high resolution microscope. It's easier to pass review. So that's our approach.
Now, if I could ask one more question, since I don't see any more hands up, just about the.
We have a bunch of questions coming in too, Tom. So go ahead.
Oh, okay.
No, Tom, please
Go
go ahead.
ahead, finish up, and then we'll go to those questions. Yeah.
The Titan trip, Dragonfly, that sounds fascinating, with 500-kilometer diameter planet. How far do you think this Dragonfly could actually travel, from one spot to another altogether?
Yeah. Okay. 500 kilometers is Enceladus. Titan is as big as the moon, Earth's moon. So it's thousands of kilometers. But your question is still interesting. How far can it go? I don't know exactly. My recollection is that it can go about 1 kilometer on a flight. So it takes off, flies for 1 kilometer, and then lands. And we could do that, a couple hundred times. So we could make some. And I'm sure, as with all these missions, once they do it a few times, they get better and better at it. So it might be that eventually we're flying 10, 20 kilometers. So flying is definitely the way to travel. Okay, maybe we'll go to the chat room now. Liz, can I see those?
Chris, we've got a bunch that are here. Let me tee them up for you. The first one, Kirill asks, can humans survive at the air pressure of Titan?
That's a really good question. And the answer is yes. The pressure is about the same pressure as you would experience if you swam to the bottom of a deep pool. Say you had a swimming pool with a 15-foot bottom, swim down that far and you're at the pressure of Titan, 1.5 atmospheres. If you swim, I think in meters, if you swim 10 meters down underwater, you're at 2 atmospheres pressure. 20 meters, 3 atmosphere, and so on. So Titan's pressure is just 5 meters underwater. So it's not a big deal at all. And it's very cold, 94 Kelvin, but you could wear a dry suit like a driver wears. As Linda said in my introduction, we do exploration in ice-covered Antarctic lakes. So we swim in water that's in equilibrium with ice, which means it's right at 0 degrees. No colder than that. And we wear dry suits with really thick underwear underneath them. That same dry suit would be all you would need on Enceladus, and it wouldn't really even need to be dry. It wouldn't need to be watertight the way a dry suit is on Earth. It could be more like a heavy parka because it's cold, but you just have to protect yourself against cold. The pressure, the reason you have to wear a spacesuit on Mars is not because it's cold on Mars. You wouldn't feel the cold. There's not enough air to conduct the heat. It's because the pressure on Mars is so low, you can't survive. It's essentially like being in the vacuum of space. The main reason astronauts wear spacesuits is because of pressure, not temperature. So on Titan, you got plenty of pressure. It's great. It's cold, but you just need heavy clothing. You don't need a spacesuit. So some people have argued that Titan is the place we ought to go. I've not drunk that Kool-Aid, but it's an interesting to work it out. If you like doing thermodynamics, just calculate the heat loss from a person in an atmosphere 1.5 times Earth with nitrogen, which is the dominant gas at 95 Kelvin. It's not bad at all. Good long underwear and a heavy parka, and you're good to go. Oh, of course, don't forget to bring a tank with oxygen because there's nothing to breathe. Okay.
Okay, so the next one, Amrita asks, what do we know about life in extreme environments on Earth that can give us a clue about life on Titan? And also a parenthetical, great presentation.
Okay, thank you for the feedback. That's a really good question. And the answer is nothing. Because on Earth, even life in the most extreme environment still is water-based. Right there, we have looked and looked. I personally looked and looked. We have never found any life forms on Earth that can grow or reproduce without being bags of liquid water. Now, there was a paper a few years ago where some people went to a tar pit in Trinidad, and they found organisms living in the tar. And they said, well, this is a Titan analog because tar is hydrocarbons and they're living in the hydrocarbons. But they're actually living in little bubbles of water in the tar. So viewed at the large scale, it's tar, but at the scale of a micron, there's drops of water that are many houses size for a microbe. So they're living in water. Water, if you put water on the tar like rain, it doesn't dissolve in the tar. It gets forced out and gets pushed into little pockets and veins, and that's where the microbe. They're still living in water. We have no example of life on Earth that's not living in water. And the essential hypothesis of life on Titan that I'm interested in is that it's living in liquid methane and liquid ethane. And this goes back to general arguments of biologists about what is required for life. And they like to say, well, a liquid solvent is required for life. So I come back and say, okay, well, what about liquid methane? Can that do it? Liquid methane and liquid ethane are nobody's first choice for an alternative to water. Things like ammonia or liquid fluorine. There's a bunch of other liquids that are much better if you were just postulating alien biology than liquid methane and ethane. Ammonia is at the top of everybody's list. But what the solar system is giving us are just 2 liquids: water on Earth, on Mars, and Enceladus and Europa, and liquid methane and ethane on Titan. Those are the 2 choices those are the 2 possibilities we can explore in our solar system. So that's what I'm doing. Ammonia, great, or a liquid hydrogen fluoride or some other exotic liquids are interesting for science fiction, but I can't find a world around here to go look at that on them, so I'm not interested.
Okay. Nicholas asks, do you think these organisms are aerobic or anaerobic?
Well, the organisms on both Enceladus and on Titan would be anaerobic, where anaerobic means they don't like oxygen. And they don't need oxygen, and they may in fact be killed by oxygen. On Earth, we have life forms that use oxygen. Many of my best friends use oxygen, and I've inhaled it. But it's a recent event on Earth, oxygen in the atmosphere. It's a recent pollution event caused by life. For most of Earth's history, Earth did not have high oxygen, and life forms did not use it. But then it was produced by cyanobacteria, life. It probably caused massive extinctions and a lot of environmental protests. But eventually, life got used to it and adapted to it. And it's wonderful because it's highly energetic. If you can develop the biochemical machinery to deal with its toxic side effects, oxygen is great fuel, rocket fuel. And that's what allowed giant multicellular organisms like us to evolve, because we are literally metabolizing rocket fuel. We don't see oxygen in the plume of Enceladus. We don't expect it to have been there, to be there. And we certainly don't see oxygen on Titan. So life there would be like, life on Enceladus would be like life on early Earth, anoxic, living without oxygen. And life on Titan would also not have any use for oxygen. Life on Titan, for them, the high energy molecule is hydrogen. It's not as good as oxygen. Their reactions are about 10 times less energetic. It's much better to breathe oxygen than it is to breathe hydrogen in terms of energy. But it'll do. It'll suffice. Hydrogen will suffice.
So the next one is a little bit related to the prior question. Ken asks, have there been any Earth microorganisms exposed to simulated extraterrestrial atmospheres to see how well they live?
Yeah, that's good. Good question. That's good research. That's being done all the time. And in fact, it's a good, at various levels it's being done. At the simplest level, high school students can take cultures and put them in a bell jar and evacuate it and see how they grow. That's a key issue, is how do organisms survive at low pressure. That's the simplest you can imagine. At the high end, we're taking organisms into space on the space station and exposing them to the vacuum of space and to the ionizing radiation and ultraviolet light from the sun. And of course, they die. Most of them die very quickly, but it's amazing how long certain spores can survive. So, and eventually we will do these same experiments on the moon and on Mars, expose organisms to the environment and see how they do.
Next up, JP says, fascinating and exciting presentation. Thank you. How long does a project like this typically take from dream proposal to approval to launch?
Okay, that's a good question. And I'll add a little more to how long does it take to then get data. So let's go back to the Dragonfly. It was in late 2016 that I went to Maryland and visited the Applied Physics Laboratory, and Zibby and Ralph asked me to join a proposal for Dragonfly. So in 2016, we started writing. I'm writing about life living on liquid methane and hydrogen consumption, and we put a proposal together, submitted it. It competed with 12 other proposals. I was involved in 2 of them, 12 other proposals. NASA selected 2 for another round of competition that lasted 1 year. So that took us through the end of 2019, middle 2019. We won. How could you not want to fly a drone on Titan, right? We won. And we started building. COVID hit. We got delayed and blah, blah, blah. But we're going to launch basically 8 years after we were selected. That's a little bit longer than needed, a little bit due to COVID, a little bit directly and indirectly because of budget problems traced back to COVID. So it's probably 2 years longer than it has to be. And then we're going to launch, and it'll take us 6.5 years to get there. But that's two years faster than it usually takes, because headquarters decided to pony up for the extra cost of the heavy lift. So we don't have to fly by Venus. So it ended up being a wash. So 2016, we started writing a proposal, and 2034, or 10 years later, 11 years later, it will launch 2027. And then in 2034, we'll land on Titan and start getting data back. And the data will come back fast. So just a couple of weeks, we'll start seeing really cool stuff. So I don't know what 2034 minus 2016 is. It's probably something like 18, close, 20 years, rounded off to 20 years. So it's 20 years. That's about how long Cassini took. Cassini was started when I was a student. I didn't even know anything. I wasn't even involved at all. And it was started by scientists previous generation to me. But then when I started at NASA, Cassini was being built, and it flew, it landed, got data, it went in orbit, got data. And a large part of my research over my career has been working with Cassini. And Dragonfly and the Enceladus mission are follow-ups to Cassini. So what those scientists did while I was still a student, I benefited from for 20 years. And so right now, in 2016, I start working on a mission that 20 years later will land. I'm probably going to be pushing up daisies. Well, pushing up poppies, since this is California. But the next generation, the students that are now, in high school, will be the postdocs and the grad students that will do all the work to analyze the data. And if I'm still around, I'll wheel over in my wheelchair and say, well, did you find hydrogen, and did it vary? And then I'll say, I told you so. Or if not, I'll say, oh, well, good try. So the outer solar system missions, by their nature, are intergenerational. Usually the people that start the project are not the people that close the door when it's over, just because it's 30 years. And that's essentially you've got to really, and people that start projects tend to be the senior scientists. Zibby's not quite as senior as me, but she's senior. And the people that do all the work and finally close project are the grad students and the postdocs that weren't even in the business when they started. And I think that's wonderful. I think it's great. It forces you to think differently about how you organize the meeting. So when I was organizing the ELSA proposal, I was the PI of that. I specifically made an effort to reach out and grab graduate students and get them on the project, thinking 20 years from now, you're going to be a mid-career scientist, and we're going to need you, and we want you to be with the project all the way. And I think we're beginning to realize that that's necessary. That's a very long-winded answer to your question, but
Great insights. So next up, Disha asks, what about cameras on Dragonfly? How many? What kind? What purpose?
Yeah, all sorts of cameras. Titan is a wonderful place for cameras. So there's all sorts of cameras. The sun is not that bright, but there's plenty of light for cameras. Cameras can be very sensitive. There's more light on the surface of Titan than there is in this room that I'm sitting in. Just the cameras and the human eye have a very as you guys know, very non-linear response. When you let your eye get dark adapted, you can see things that are literally millions of times fainter than bright sunlight. And cameras can do the same. And so Titan only gets 1% of the light that the Earth does. And so it's not bright. And then the haze filters out different colors, but still we can get good images on the ground. So there's lots of cameras. I don't know all of them. Some of them are for navigation, so they can see where they're flying. But all of them will also return wonderful images for science too.
We have another question here from Ken. He asks, any considerations to placing pontoons on the drone for flotation on one of these lakes?
Great. Well, first, let me just say hello, Ken. Good to see you again. I'm glad you're weathering the pandemic. I hope you've had your shots, but we'll move on to your question. That would be good. We can't do it. We don't have enough mass allocation. And the problem is the drone is pretty big and it takes a lot of oomph to fly it. And so that's our limitation. It's not launch. We'll have plenty of, the rockets are too big now. We'll probably have hitchhikers. Entering on Titan is not a problem. On Mars, the mass limitation is usually getting down to the ground from the atmosphere because it's a very hard entry problem. On Titan, it's a breeze. You just float down through this thick atmosphere. But our mass limitation is flying, taking off once we've landed, right? And so that if we put pontoons on, we couldn't fly. So we're going to stay out of the water. We might go to the shore. We might fly over a lake, but we're not going to land on the water. So that'll be a future mission. Maybe a submarine. That would be cool.
Next question is from Jim. He asks, how will the Dragonfly drone select landing sites?
I'm not sure the answer to that. There's a team that will, the paramount criteria will be safety, of course. Can they land safely? My understanding of the way they will do it is when it's sitting in a spot and they decide they want to fly somewhere, controllers on Earth will say, here's where we want you to fly. Then the drone will take off, go over to that spot and hover and take pictures and then come back to where it took off from and send those pictures to Earth. Earthlings will look at those pictures and then give the drone the final go, no go to that spot. And then if the Earth controllers say go, the drone will take off, fly back to that spot and land exactly in the spot that it photographed. Now that's how they're going to do it initially. Now, if they build up confidence for many, many flights, they might get brave and land and let the machine decide whether or not it's safe to land. Because remember, Saturn is effectively 9 AU away at the minimum and 11 AU maximum, and that's 8 minutes light time per AU. That's an 80-minute one-way light trip, right? So you can't exactly remote control it. So it's got to be, everything the drone does has got to be autonomous. It's got to make its own decisions. You can't spend 80 minutes hovering, waiting for you to tell it to land or not to land.
Next we have from Elena. Could it be possible to study organisms like tardigrades to understand how they survive extreme conditions? Could this potentially help for human survival on other planets?
You must be reading my email. Today, in fact, I'm in correspondence with a researcher in Maryland about doing experiments with tardigrades to look at their ability to survive gamma radiation. And I was telling her you should contact Jonathan Stone at McMaster, who does this work and has gone with me on a field trip looking at tardigrades in deserts. And tardigrades are my favorite little critters for just this reason. So indeed, yes, a big yes to your thing. They are, in terms of the ability to survive in space, equals of microorganisms. And so one of my favorite little make-up stories is 65 million years ago, the asteroid that slammed into Mexico, the Yucatan, that wiped out the dinosaurs, kicked rocks into space. Some of those rocks landed on Mars, and certainly did, and may have carried organisms from Earth inside the rocks, just like we get rocks on Earth from Mars. And the organisms that could have been carried there and still been alive when they reached Mars would have been microorganisms and tardigrades. So I'm predicting we'll find tardigrades on Mars that were sent there 65 million years ago by the exchange of meteorites from asteroid impacts on the Earth. The dinosaurs went out, but the tardigrades went to space. So they're very good organisms. If you're looking for an organism in extreme environment, tardigrades are a good one. You can also see them easily with a small, simple microscope. They live in many different places. It's a fascinating hobby to go look for tardigrades and dry them up and look at them in dried state. It's kind of for those of you who know about lenses and things like that, same skill set, but now apply it in the other direction. Simple microscope, look for tardigrades, map out their distribution in your neighborhood. Okay.
So at
I
the
think
moment,
we've got
this is the
somebody-
last one in the queue. So if anybody's got more, bring them on. This is
Okay.
from Alop. And the question is, how will Dragonfly communicate with Earth? And how does the distance affect communication, since it takes minutes for radio waves to travel to Titan?
Right. It takes 80 minutes. That's right. And if you remember the picture of the drone, it had a little pancake thing that flopped up. That pancake thing is a direct to Earth antenna. So that's how it communicates to Earth. It has a foldable antenna, and they fold it up, point it toward Earth. Earth is very easy to find in the sky. It's going to be very close to the sun. And the tilt of Saturn's ring plane is very close to Earth's tilt, so it's about 25 degrees. So Earth will be, we're landing near the equator, so Earth will be about 25 degrees up above the horizon. Azimuth will be 25, and you just point at it and talk directly. And the signal, like you're saying, takes a long time for the radio waves to get here. It'll take 80 minutes to get here and 80 minutes to get back. So it's even worse than Mars in terms of round trip light time delays. That's why the drone has to be autonomous. Everything it does has to follow pre-programmed scripts. So it's not autonomous in that it's making decisions on where it's going to go and what it's going to do. But once a decision has been made, the drone has to execute it autonomously. The same with the instruments. So once we decide we're going to make a measurement, we send the drone, make the instructions, make this measurement, and then it follows an internal set of steps to make that measurement. We do the same thing on Mars. And if any of the steps don't work, it has safeties that click in and stops. And so, when we do an experiment on Mars, the first thing we ask is, did it run to completion? If it ran to completion, it means it didn't hit any failure modes, right? Safety checks to keep it from messing up. And the same thing would be on Titan.
I've got a couple more here. Michael asks, can Dragonfly get to Kraken Mare?
No, it's too far away, I believe. I'm pretty sure it's too far away from where we're landing. Yeah, I don't think we're going to get to any of the large lakes. I think we're too far from them. I'm not 100% sure of that. You could probably find the answer on the Dragonfly website, but I'm pretty sure we're too far to fly to any of the large lakes. So
And
small
then
puddles.
Jenny asks, any
wet
estimations on how long Dragonfly will be able to operate?
Well, that's a good question. We are powered by an MMRTG, and they degrade over time. And so we will probably, if nothing breaks, eventually the MMR2Gs will be too weak to charge up the batteries in order to allow us to fly. No, that doesn't make any sense, because they'll just take longer to charge up. So I don't see any reason, I don't see any intrinsic limit to the lifetime. It could, in principle, be 20 years or 30 years. It just takes longer and longer. The RTGs degrade, not because the radioactive element stops being radioactive. My understanding is it degrades because the radiation destroys the thermocouples that convert the heat to energy, makes them brittle. It's a material science problem, not a radiation physics problem. But eventually they degrade, and the half-life of their degradation is only something like 5 years. So we're taking 6 years to get there. So the MMRTGs will be a little less than half as strong when we get there as when we launched. So 5 years later, they'll be weaker, and 10 years later, they'll be even weaker, and so on. So that means it'll take longer and longer to charge up the batteries. So I think, but I don't think unless something has to break before we lose the mission. We just go slower, fly longer and longer between charges.
I've got a couple more here. Antal says, hi, could Dragonfly drop probes into the oceans of Titan?
It couldn't for two reasons. One is we can't carry anything. We are at our mass limit of what we can fly. If we added any mass, I don't think we'd be able to fly. We'd have to have bigger propellers or more propellers or something. So that's our fundamental limit on how heavy the instruments can be, is the requirement to fly on Titan. So we wouldn't be able to carry a probe, and we can't get close. We're landing near the equator. The image I showed you of the big lakes on Mars is centered over the pole, the South Pole. And so the equator, I think, is too far for us to get to. I'm not 100% sure that we can't get to one of the large lakes, so-called oceans or seas, but I'm pretty sure that we couldn't. Now, maybe after we've done 10 years on Titan or 5 years on Titan, we say, okay, well, we got nothing else to do. Let's step by step make it all the way to one of these lakes. Then maybe so. I'm not sure on that. I think I should check the answer to that, just so that I know.
And then Amrita says, reading about tardigrades, and they're fascinating. Would you consider taking them along on ELSA?
That would be against the law, for good reason. If we dropped anything, we have to be very clean, and we have to prevent any crash on the surface for the reasons of contamination control, so-called planetary protection. And this is on Mars. People say, well, that's kind of silly. Anything you dump on Mars is just going to die. Okay, that may be true. That's not true on Enceladus. If you were to go with a contaminated spacecraft and contaminate the ocean and Enceladus, there's a good chance that many of the microbes would be happy to live there. So it's the most serious forward contamination problem in the solar system, because we know that there's Earth life that would live there. And if you took a chunk of dirt from your backyard and threw it in that ocean of Enceladus, it would seed that ocean. That would be no longer lifeless if it was lifeless. So we don't want to do that without knowing what we're doing. So the first mission won't do it. Maybe eventually humans might decide to do that, but not without further consideration.
Chris, I don't have any further questions typed into the chat box here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to enter in there or just ask them.
I have one, if you can hear me. Wanted to ask if there's a connection between the two missions and what we know so far and we'll learn about exoplanets as far as life on them and the water versus methane question.
Right.
I hope
right.
that's.
Yeah, two questions. Let me take them one at a time. There's no necessary connection between the Enceladus mission and the Titan mission. They both go to Saturn. So I put them together here mostly to show the difference between these two different worlds and how we're searching for life on them, and how Titan is so bizarre in terms of what we're looking for, and Enceladus is so familiar. But there's no necessary connection. The two missions, if the Enceladus mission is selected next round, it will proceed apace. Many of the same people like me will be involved with both of them, but it's really quite different approaches to searching for life. Now to your other question about exoplanets. Exoplanets are the big topic right now in planetary science, and rightly so. We're discovering thousands of them. It's quite astounding, and we may find evidence for life on exoplanets, but we will not be able to study the biochemistry. I'm interested in understanding if there's life on Enceladus. Does it have the same biochemistry as life on Earth? Is it genetically related to life on Earth? Or is it a second genesis of life, a separate origin of life? To answer that question, we need to actually have the biochemistry of the organism to study. So when we look at exoplanets, we might see signatures of life in the atmosphere, like these gases, oxygen and methane and CO2. If we see an Earth-like world orbiting a sun-like star, and we see oxygen, methane, and CO2 in its atmosphere, then we have found life on an exoplanet. But we don't know if that life is the same as us, if its biochemistry is the same as ours, if it's different, if it's a second genesis. Does n equal 2, or is just n equal 1, and 1 is a lot more widespread than we know? Well, how could life on an exoplanet be related to life on Earth? It's impossible. If we find life there, it's got to be aliens, right? Well, not necessarily. And I point to Borisov, Comet Borisov. You all remember looking at it just 2 years ago. That was an interstellar comet. Its V infinity was something like 40 kilometers per second. It came screaming into the solar system from other stars. It was not gravitationally bound to our sun, right? It came screaming in, and it left behind something like 10 to the 7 grams of dust in our solar system, which Earth eventually is going to land on Earth. Some of it's going to land on Earth. If there was life forms, dormant life forms in that comet, they would have gotten spread all over the solar system. Now, Borisov didn't get much press because it was overshadowed by Oumuamua, which was the first large interstellar object detected, and it looked so bizarre. But Borisov is more interesting from the point of view of interstellar panspermia because it's comet leaving behind dust. So it's no reason in principle that life couldn't be spread from star to star. So if we find life on exoplanets, that doesn't prove that there's more than one type of life in the universe. It just proves that there's life out there, but we still don't really know whether n equals 1 or n equals 2 or more. I'd be just happy if n equals 2. Part of my reason for being fascinated about Titan is that if we find life on Titan, it is definitely not related to us. Nothing that lives in liquid methane is related to us. It may not be the case for Enceladus. And maybe we find life on Enceladus and it turns out to be related to life on Earth. They share a common origin that came in when the solar system formed. The seeds of life were in the seeds of the solar system formation. And Earth, Mars, Europa, and Enceladus all imbibe the same seeds of the same life. And so we're all brothers and sisters in the solar system. Well, that's a great kumbaya thought, but it's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for n equals 2. And Titan will definitely give it to us if there's life on Titan. That's why I'm so jazzed about searching for life on Titan, because if we find it, it tells us not only is there a second genesis of life, but that it's really weird. Either they're weird or we're weird, because methane and water are very different. One of us is weird. And so that would be my preferred outcome.
Excellent. Thank you.
I don't see any further questions at this time.
Okay.
That was
well,
really great. Thank you.
my pleasure. Good. As
Thank you
always,
very
good
much.
to talk to you, and stay safe, and call back in 13 years. We'll have new results.
Better.
Chris, I'm happy that you've given us permission to record the presentation, and it will be in SFAA's archive.
Great.
And I'm sure many people will be happy to look at it a second time.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
See you in 13
Bye-bye.
years.